This conference is now being recorded.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the New York State AGCO webinar, Purchasing Cooperatives. My name is Matthew Darius. I'm the Senior Staff Associate for Professional Development, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Operator assistance is available at any time during this conference by pressing £0. And if you have a question for our presenters, you can hit £7 on your phone, and we'll put you right through so you can ask right over the phone. A Q&A session will follow this presentation, and you may send chat questions at any time during the presentation by using the chat window on your right. Without further ado, Bob, please begin.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the third and final session of our purchasing webinar series. As you see, we're going to cover things that we talked about a little bit in the last two times, but there's some new areas here relative to procedures and best practices. And when we get into the purpose of 3 auditors later, really what we're doing is I want to run you through what those people are looking for, because we know that since the Rosalind incident on Long Island, the state comptroller's office has been out doing a substantial number of audits, and I want you to be aware of what they're looking for and how to protect yourself. And Paul Apicella is here with me today. Paul is the purchasing agent at Troy City School District. He's been there for a number of years. So I'll start off on the go to the first slide. Obviously, in anything to do with purchasing, we have to stress the ethical relationship that you're involved with. Basically, you're the public agent for the school district, and your position really is to get the best value for the least dollars for your district. Holding that position, you have to be sure to avoid any improprieties or any favoritism that you might give anyone, because there's always someone looking to see that that's done. Basically, you should always stress being fair to all of your vendors and treat them all the same way. However you're handling things, if you look at it down at the bottom line, be consistent and non-arbitrary in procedures. Then somebody won't come back and say, well, you did this for this individual or something for something else. The other thing that they hand in glove with this, if vendors are providing you with goods and services, they really expect to be paid on time. So sometimes you don't have some control over that, but that's a critical area to make sure that that timely payment is made when they're delivering the goods and services, because obviously they have cash flow issues like we do in school districts. And the other thing, lastly, on this page, I want to stress is if you have an issue with a vendor or a dispute, you should really try to handle it calmly and handle it as early as you can to try to resolve any issues that might arise. It will pay you benefits in the long run to get anything cleared up or misconception of any items early in the game. Again, I'm going to go back on the next page. What governs your operation basically is, the first thing is your board policy for purchasing. What we said the last time is, this should be done and updated every year on an annual basis. And one of the things that in all audits, they found that, in fact, staff, purchasing agents, whatever, weren't following their own internal policies. So make sure you do that. And if you say that there's a need for a change or something's inactive or inappropriate, you should really review that on an annualized basis and present it for approval at the annual reorganization meeting at the beginning of each school year. And I would say make it a policy to do that. Then if there's any changes in the law, rules, and regulations or whatever, your board can be appraised of that, and you can make needed changes in your policy. Go ahead, Paul. You got anything?
I'd like to interject here that in your policies, with the change in the laws from 15 to 20 and 10 to 20 and 20 to 35, you should update that in your policy also, because if it's not updated in your policy, even though the law allows it, you still have to follow what's in your purchasing policy. So that should be changed also and updated.
Okay, on the next page, basically what we're stressing is, work with your district procedures, like Paul said, and do any updates that you need. The other thing is you should work with your office and your business official to create procedures within the business office and how you handle this and how you process payments so that will go smoothly. The other thing is you have to be careful about is providing any inside information to potential vendors for a bid. A lot of times people try to steer some things their way, and what I'm alluding to in the last information about the district staff getting involved in purchasing requirements, oftentimes we find that teachers or technology people want a particular goods or product. The provision provides for comparable or equal. So if a Dell computer is equal to an HP or something, unless you have a standardization agreement in place, you really have to go basically with the result of the bid. Again, we're going to go over some of the purchasing agent responsibilities. Paul's going to interject as we go along here, but obviously the first one is the vendor file. Vendor files can be tedious to maintain, but the thing is they should be updated and constantly reviewed as you go along. The biggest problem I found in the past is you find the same vendor in 2 or 3 files or with just a slightly different name, and oftentimes that can lead to overpayments or confusion in processing payments. You have anything to add on that, Paul?
No, not on that one.
Okay, good. And the other item we're going down here is a lot of times when we do the purchase orders, obviously you have to make sure that there's adequate budget codes provided for the purchase. I know oftentimes we find that some of your administrators, they want to buy equipment out of a supplies and materials line or vice versa, rather than going through a budget transfer process. So I would work with your administrators to make sure that, in fact, you have that process in place. Budget transfers generally are an issue that's approved by the board, or many times the board might authorize the superintendent to approve budget transfers to a certain level, and anything beyond that level gets brought to the board, or they might have it so every month whatever the superintendent approved gets presented to the board. So it's something that you really should look into and delineate in your purchasing policy.
And I would make sure that if you're going to issue a purchase order that needs a budget transfer, that approval is done. The budget transfer is approved prior than cutting the purchase order, because you could be cited for cutting purchase orders without having enough money in the code. And usually federal codes, they don't classify anything equipment unless it's over $1,000. So they usually buy things .45 something that's $800, $900, and it's not classified equipment in the federal guidelines unless it's $1,000 or more. But we do whatever our thresholds are: $500, $1,000, $250. So you take that into consideration when tagging your assets also.
Okay, and moving on to the next slide, we stressed again the need for the training of the district staff. Periodically, I know when I was in the position, we'd organize workshops periodically or send them out for training so that everyone, in fact, knew the procedures and process in place. And the next item down, really what I'm alluding to is not only should your business people know that, but the administrators in the rest of the district should know it. Generally, I find there's a lot of the problems result from the fact that an administrator really doesn't know the procedures for the whole purchasing process. So I would say periodically you should meet with those people, the administrators, because in fact they sign off on a lot of these purchase orders, and they should realize what goes behind that when they're putting their name on that signature, and basically they're processing payments on various goods or concerns. Again, I stress getting some of the training in this. There's various conferences that associations put on. I know the New York State Association of School Business Officials provides information such as we're doing or at conferences. I'm going to let Paul talk a little bit about SAMPO. He's a official in SAMPO, and he can tell us a little bit about what they do for training.
SAMPO stands for New York State Association of Municipal Purchasing Officials Incorporated, and it's an organization that's compiled of all purchasing people throughout the state, and we kind of take the pride in being the leader in purchasing education. We have 3 conferences throughout the year. We have our main one in May every year in Saratoga, or this year it's in Lake George, and it's 3 days, and it covers a wide variety of classes. State controllers there, their offices there talking about audits and what to look for, red flags in purchasing. Then they have a class on updates in legal, in the law. And then we have a conference, the Long Island Conference in October for those that can't make it in May. And then we also have one on the western part of the state. So we pretty much cover the entire state throughout the year and having in-depth training conferences. And that, along with the various workshops throughout the year that ASBO has, there's plenty of training out there for purchasing officials.
Okay. Moving on to the next slide. Basically, what we talked about is changes that basically result from the changes in the law, controller's opinion, and various audit issues that are brought up. So really, the district should keep abreast of this so that the best interest of the district is always in mind. The other thing is to really look at some other procedures such as purchasing law or policies, which basically lay out minimum requirements. And my thought is, if there's a question if you should bid or not, I'd rather have you err on the side of doing the bid rather than not doing it. And I'm going to let Paul talk a little bit about state contracts and some other things that influence the process.
As it says there, the New York State contract is not always the best deal. With that being said, it is an exception to bidding, and it depends on what the product is that you're buying and the duration of how long you're going to need it. Now, sometimes you get a better price going out to bid for an item that's on state contract because the contract has to be spread out over the period of a year or 2 years, however long they let it out for. So the vendors have to build in their price increase. And then also you got to take into consideration, if you're in Buffalo and the person shipping to you from the state is in Albany, they have transportation costs out there. So sometimes putting it out to bid as a one-time purchase, you will get a better price in the state contract. But with that being said, you should always have in your bid specifications that if you're bidding out the item that's on the state contract, and it's the same item under the same terms, the same conditions, and the state contract is lower, then you have the right to reject that bid and buy your item off of the state contract.
Okay, great. On the next slide here, we're going to get into some of the issues about requests for proposals and when they're used in RFQs. So I'm going to let Paul go through these issues here. And if you have any questions as we go through this, I'd urge you to ask them now. But go ahead, Paul.
Okay, a request for proposal is basically used instead of a bid when you're soliciting competition for items that are highly technical, or you need a special training or testing or certification for, such as the attorneys or auditors or architects. When you need special licenses for them, it gives you the leeway to to negotiate and to change some things in it after the proposals come in, to get your final and best offer from the vendor. Whereas in a bid, whatever your price is, whatever your best offer is, that's what you have to take. Some examples, additional examples of professional services that we use in a school district, the newest one being transportation. Now, a school district is the only one that can bid out, can do an RFP on transportation. Counties, et cetera, still have to put it out to bid. Whereas a school district, there's 10 points in a transportation RFP that has to be in there. And they did that. You can either put it out to bid or you can use the RFP process. And doing the RFP process for transportation, that takes into consideration accidents, number of times a bus fails inspection, driver reports, and there's a whole list of items that you can take into consideration when evaluating the RFP against taking a bid for the lowest price. Some other examples of an RFP are physicians, attorneys, architects and engineers, accountants, auditors, fire protection services, technology. Anything that's really highly technical or needs more than just the best price is you can use the RFP on it.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. Well, that's good. Again, on the RFP process, there's generally questions on that, but as we go along here, interject if you want to get any more.
When you do a request for proposal, you have a point evaluation system, whereas you have put different values on different things that you're asking for in the RFP. So much for price, so much for the technical aspect of it, so much on their references. Depending on what you're asking for, you put points on it, and that's how you evaluate the system. A good way to do it is not open the price up right away, because a lot of times that may sway people to in favor of whatever points they want to give it on another example. And so maybe do a two-part one where you put the proposal out, you evaluate that, and then you open up the price afterwards after you find out who you think is the best one, and then you can negotiate the price back and forth like that with the RFP. But it's very important to mark out your scope of work that you want done and be as very precise as you possibly can. And
okay, great. Well, next, we'll get into some of the issues relative to the request for quotes. There are some differences in that. I'll let Paul discuss the nuances of it.
Now, the request for quotation is that's generally used to seek competition and used for obtaining prices and delivery information, et cetera, like that. And you could use that to determine which way you should really go to procure this item. If you put out a request for a quote for certain items and the quotes come in over the bid thresholds, then you know you have to put it out for bid. If the quotes come in and it's highly technical, et cetera, then you know you can go the RFP route. Some examples that they use for quotations is if you run into a sole source item, you get some quotes on the prices from that, although if there's only sole source should be there's nobody else out there giving you the item, but you still got to get quotes on the price. And also in emergencies when you don't have time to put out a bid, you go out and you get quotes on getting that project done if it's going to affect the health and welfare of the community or the students. It's also used to determine the service, and again, it determines a threshold as to how you're going to procure it. You can either get the quotes and purchase it from the quote, or you can have to put out a bid for it or go the RFP process.
Okay. The next slide basically is we're dealing with, how do you write these? Well, I would say if you're new to this, there's probably procedures in place, written procedures in your district, or I would basically rely upon your fellow purchasing agents in neighboring districts or the state association to get some of this information. There's generally a lot of that stuff available. It's not you will have to tailor make it to your district, but it's a lot easier than starting out cold. Or if you wanted to craft basically a model document for yourself, use this information as guidance, and then basically, set it up so that you can replicate this as you go along, and the needs are there. The other thing that's germane to this is you have to describe the services that are required, when they need to be accomplished, set the standards of what will be gauged on, and acceptable completion dates. The other thing is a lot of these items, which these items that fall in here, such as garbage pickup, attorneys, use of attorneys, architects, they're generally done once a year at the reorganization meeting of the board. So it behooves you to get into a cycle and basically, once you have this set up, do it as needed. Some of these contracts last for 2 and 3 years, but track those, and then when it's time to be up for renewal again, you can proceed with that so you don't go out a number of years without addressing the needs of that and looking at it. Next thing, there's some information about professional service contracts. I'm going to let Paul cover this a little bit.
Okay, when you're going out to get a contract for service, say for fire inspection of your fire systems or elevator service or anything like that, you should make sure you read the contract for details in compliance with the proposal or quotations. When you have a service contract, anybody that comes on public property, municipal property, is subject to the Department of Labor's prevailing wages. And so you have to make sure that you get a PRC number for that. Make sure that you have your insurance requirements in there. Check with your attorney, check with your insurance carrier, make sure your levels of liability are in there. Make sure your when you get their insurance certificates, the district is named on there as a additional insured. And make sure that your term of renewal is in there. If there's any price increases in that, it should be spelled out how they're going to be increased. Usually you go by the CPI of the month before the contract expires is the CPI you use. And then make sure that your attorney reads it all over and that there's no legal language in there that doesn't favor the district and is in favor of the vendor.
Okay. I guess I'm a page behind here. Okay, on the next one, we're talking about auditors. What types of audits are there, and what roles do they play in the positions that you're filling? Basically, the types are, the first one is claims auditor. We know that as an internal claims auditor. Now, which is new over the last couple of years, is you have internal control audits, which basically do a risk assessment. Those are someone brought in from outside of your district, whether you contract it or have that service provided by a BOCES. Then the other issue is you have your annual external independent audit, which is required by law. We all know each summer the auditors come in, basically review everything and render an opinion. And then as of late, more often now than ever used to be, is the state comptroller's office is doing audits of school districts and BOCES pretty much on a periodic basis. And as you know, you can, at any time, if you want to, you can look up the audit reports and basically see what they've been citing. What I hope to do when we go through these items here of what the various auditors focus on will bring some of that to light. And again, the other thing is members of the public requesting information through Freedom of Information Act, basically, in some respect act as an auditor. They're putting some of that information to the public or publishing it or whatever. So what I want to do is we'll go through what the auditors do and what particular ones are, what particular items they're looking for as they do their jobs. The internal claims auditor, basically, that person works for the Board of Education and represents them. He's the eyes and ears relative to reviewing and approving the claims for payment. If he doesn't approve it, basically you can't make payment on the goods or services. They should make sure that the payments comply with the laws, regulations, and the internal policies. And basically, they become, as you know, as you work with them, they're an integral part of generating payment for the goods and services that you receive. And again, these people are going to be also subject to review by the external auditor and by the internal auditor. So what we've gone from is a couple of years ago, basically an independent audit, to really 3 types of audits being ongoing and being crossed and conducted on an ongoing basis. Continuing on to the next page, internal claims auditor. Basically, they're making sure that the original documents are present. They're looking for original invoices. We know sometimes that's an issue. And facsimile copies rather than initially signed. They're looking for the proper approval documents that have to be into the purchase order packet. And basically, the next issue is a difficult one that we deal with in school districts, but it's the whole issue of confirming purchase orders. Basically, the only one who can approve a purchase order is the purchasing agent, and sometimes through procedures, internal or external, we get the cart before the horse. But it's the policy, what they ordered on, that the purchase order has to be in place before you proceed with the purchase. You wanted to say anything about that, Paul, on the confirmation process?
We use the finance manager system, and that generates our purchase orders. We're not on the electronic remote requisition yet, but when the maintenance needs a purchase order, we handle that 2 ways. We handle it with a blanket purchase order, which is out there to some certain companies, and the men are allowed to go out and buy against that purchase order small dollar amounts. It can't exceed $100 at one time. And then when they goes over $100, if they call in and they need a purchase order, they're required to send down the requisition, and that gets approved, and then the purchase order goes into the computer, and the computer generates the PO. But it may not print out. We don't print it out right away at that time. So occasionally there's an invoice dated before the PO, but the PO's been entered into the computer. And when we do that, before we issue the purchase order, to avoid what they're really concerned about with confirming purchase orders, there's no money in the account. But that doesn't happen the way we do it. It's they don't get the purchase order unless there is money to cover the account. And if they try to do it, the purchase order is denied, and they just can't get what they have to get for to repair. And there's been some issues with that, because sometimes they'll still go out, buy the item, and then that comes into play where invoices are being paid after 90 days or more, because these guys will go out, they'll go into the store knows them, they'll get an invoice, they'll give them the stuff, they'll go back, they'll hand the invoice into the office, and it never comes up here to us in purchasing till maybe 30, 60, 90 days after it's due. And then we say, well, where's the purchase order? No, we didn't get one. And that's basically what they're really focusing on, is items that happen like that, where they go out, get the stuff, bring it in, and then the invoice is 30, 60, 90 days before it's paid because no purchase order was issued on it.
And again, this is something that would tip off an internal claims auditor if something is not right in the process, or it's being circumvented, or procedures are not being followed. Again, we're going to go to the internal claims auditor. Basically, he looks at the whole issue of circumvention and splitting purchase orders. Can you just talk about that a little bit, Paul? On
the splitting of purchase orders is a big issue that when the auditors come in, they look at that to make sure that they're not splitting your aggregate purchases to avoid bidding. The aggregate amount is within a 12-month period commencing on the date of the purchase is what they consider looking at purchases that have to be bid. It says here on a recent statutory amendments relating to competitive bidding, which was at the Purchase Council, OGS Purchase Council in July. It says, expressly states that in determining whether purchase is an expenditure within the discretionary threshold amounts established in general municipal law, the reasonably expected aggregate of all purchases of the same commodity, service, or technology to be made within the 12-month period commencing on the date of the purchase must be considered. Expressly states that purchases of commodity service may not be artificially divided for the purpose of satisfying the discretionary buying thresholds established in general municipal law. So that you got to be very careful, and as Bob has said earlier, if you're not sure whether something is going to meet the threshold or not, it's always best to put it out to bid. And that way you're always covered. And if you buy something that's spend $15,000 and then later on in the year it comes up where you got to buy something that's $6,000, you got to put that $6,000 out to bid because the total aggregate purchase of that particular item is over the $20,000 allowed by law. And these are items that they look for. So you may get a slap on the wrist the first time this happens because it was something new that you weren't aware of. But the next time around, you better be aware of it and keep documentation of it so that when that item comes up again, that you know it has to be bid, you put it out to bid.
Okay, and to wrap up on this page here, basically, that internal claims order, he's looking for the claims packets to make sure that all the proper documents are there. I always like to keep all associated documents relative to one purchase order in the same file. I know sometimes that's not possible, but really what that does, if you adopt a system like that and get it together, is I like to have everything there and anticipate every question that an auditor will ask you. So basically you're covered with what's in there. And in the last item, what we're noted here is if by agreement you're allowed to pay vendors an increased price based upon a percentage, you have to make sure that somebody's checking that and reviewing those prices on an ongoing basis. It's pretty much self-explanatory. Going to the last, excuse me. Going to the last page here on the vendor files. Again, that's the whole thing of making sure that the vendor addresses are correct. From the purchase orders, if you're going to use, if there is a change, wrap up with everything you have associated with one vendor number, and then put a new vendor number in for the change. It should help you in avoiding duplicates or overpayments. And again, this whole issue of the original invoice versus the statement is a particularly sensitive issue upon audit, and in all respects, you should always try to get the original invoice, even though we know in operational terms sometimes that's not possible. But I would get a duplicate invoice or a photocopy, and basically with some notation on it that the original was lost or misplaced or something of that nature.
Yeah, you should never pay from the statement because you don't know what the dollar amount on the statement includes. There may be tax on that invoice. There may be shipping when there isn't supposed to be any. They may not have given you the right discount. They may have given you the wrong pricing. So just to pay off of the statement is basically a real no, because again, you don't know what that dollar amount signifies on that statement. So you should always get the original invoice, a copy of the invoice. If it's lost, call the company, send it back to them, say I need a copy of the invoice documenting this statement, and then have the person who ordered the stuff sign off on that invoice, and then send it back up and put it in your package.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Good. Next, what I'm going to do is review some of the issues that the internal control audit would look into and follow. This is something new that's been instituted over the last couple of years based upon the lack of following procedures and policies that were in place. Basically, they work for the Board of Education, and what they really are doing is they're doing a risk assessment of your procedures, and they're looking at how you might develop better internal controls to minimize risk. When they look at this, basically, they generally would present this and give you a time frame over which to implement this, and then it should be expected that the next year when they come in to do another assessment, you would have corrected these issues, and basically they can, be assured of that by looking at the records that are in play. The other thing that the impetus really for the whole process of this internal audit is basically to give the government entities more control over the systems and assurance that the monies are being spent according to rules and regulations that are currently in place. The other thing that internal assessment will do is they will also look at the records of the external auditor, which is your independent audit, and also the records of the claims auditor. So, in fact, someone is looking at that work to assure that it's in compliance. Okay, the other things they're going to look at, and some of this is competitive, but basically they're going to look at the vendor names being adjusted. Are there W-9s on file where an individual or an individual sole provider, name of a company, it might be just an individual, is providing these services? You'll need that for issuing 1099s. Again, they're going to look at is there segregation of duties between the purchasing agent and the accounts payable. Really, there should be. The purchasing agent really shouldn't have the accounts payable clerk reporting to them. There should be a segregation so that, in fact, that person works independent under the business administrator. And again, the last thing we're basically alluding to, this is more in the area of the last bullet in the area of cash collections, but any cash collections or payments basically should be accounted for by someone independent. I know in the BOCES where I am, any checks or cash that comes into the business office is taken in and recorded by one individual, then passed to another individual to be deposited to the appropriate accounts, and then in fact another individual checks that to make sure that in fact that was followed up on and done. And the other thing that the internal controls order will look at basically is that are there any improprieties? Are there any connections with the members of the school board? If they have a business that the district is contracting for, did they make that known? If there was a vote on that came to vote, did they basically abstain from the vote because they had an interest in it? So these are all things that sometimes they don't seem like much, but every now and then you find these issues, and it behooves you to make sure you get these headed off in the initial stages. The next item I'm going to go over is the role of the external control auditor. Basically, this is what I refer to as the annual independent audit. It's required of all school districts, pretty much, unless you're very small and minute. Basically, what they're there to do is, review the information that affects your financial statements. And it really is a critical area, in fact, because in many of your districts now you're involved with capital projects and the like, and you want to have financial records on file that are certified by the auditors that are compliant, and in fact, that will help you to get higher bond ratings when you're getting financing for your projects. The things that they will do basically is they will test the controls and methodology that you're currently using to generate reports, and make sure that gets accurately reflected in the financial statements. And those financial statements basically are a result of all of the records that are being processed. We know that purchase orders basically result in expenditures of goods, supplies, and materials, and which is basically the other portion of the budget that isn't the 85% of salary and fringe benefits that are paid. So it's a big accounting for every budgetary item in the district. The other thing to look at is for compliance with the laws, regulations, and make sure you're following your internal policies. And they will review, like I said before, the internal controls auditor's work. So the external auditor will look at the risk assessment and the internal controls work, and to see if that complies, or also as a guide to where they might find some issues of weakness, which they might want to mention. The next page, really what it alludes to is the fact that it's the business office staff work in conjunction with everyone who does an accounting assignment or works on input such as purchase orders, payments, and that. All of those things have to be basically tied out and settled at the end of the year, so proper financial statements can be put in place. The next item, what they also look for is access to records, documents, computer files, whatever. What the issue is really you shouldn't have access to any types of records or files that you really don't need to do your job. Having multiple access to records basically lends itself to records being manipulated, but not maybe by error or maybe intentionally, or changes being made, and really what you do is you kind of lose your audit trail. So again, you should only have people assigned to the areas that they control on a computerized system. The other thing is, we just mentioned here, obviously all of these systems are protected by passwords. So in fact, you shouldn't, to accomplish a problem, you shouldn't really give your staff word to another person, because basically then in fact they're acting in your stead. If anything does go wrong, basically it's your password that's tied to the transaction. So I know sometimes that becomes an issue, but I would say be mindful of that. Next item, they're going to look at the fixed asset inventory and how you update and maintain. I'm going to ask Paul to just talk a little bit about the fixed asset inventory.
Fixed assets is a hot topic with the auditors. Just recently, a school district locally was cited for an audit with the state controller for not having the items listed in their inventory, and they were not where they were supposed to be. Eventually, they found them, but they cite them for lack of tagging. They look to see if assets are tagged, where they are, where they say they're going to be. If they're moved around, they should be moved around in the asset inventory book. I know when I got audited, they took my asset book and they said, all right, we're taking your book and we're going out and we're going to see if these assets are right where they say they are. And so it's important to have all your assets inventoried properly, put into the report so that the insurance figures are correct, the inventory and the buildings are proper, because you're using taxpayers' money there, and it's not, they don't take this lightly. If something is bought and not properly taken controlled, listed, put down for insurance, they take that very seriously. So it's very important to, when the asset comes in, to tag it, log it into your computer system or whatever system you use for inventory control, and keep track of them that way. Fixed assets have certain dollar thresholds. It depends on what the district wants you to record up to that dollar amount. Anything, maybe it could be 250 and over, 500 and over, 1,000 and over. It depends on what your district policy is as to what you should record in your fixed assets.
And if you haven't looked at your district policy, you should know that, and if it needs to be updated, you should update that accordingly for the current times. Next item, I'm going to go through some of the things that the Office of the State Comptroller has been looking at and cited in audits that have been going on basically for the last 3 and 4 years. Basically, they'll come in and do a risk assessment just like your internal audit group will do. And I think what they've been finding lately, because these things have been in place, a lot of that's been cleaned up. And again, if they look at some of the items that were reviewed before, they'll look at the performance of that to see if it's been cleared up. The other thing they'll do is they'll come in and do a selected test control, basically. They'll look at randomly some of your activities or your policies or procedures. They'll go through those top to bottom to see if you're in compliance, if there's any recommended changes that can be made. Again, they're going to look at the transaction accounts, the reviews. Are supplies coded to 200? Our equipment coded to 200, our supplies and materials 300, our contractual expenses into a 400 account. They're going to look at that to make sure there's no circumvention of, using transfers or what's approved for transfer. And basically, their operation is to help you provide compliance internally and follow the best practices as these changes are implemented based upon what's been transpired. Now, the next item we're going to look at a little bit is what are they finding and what are you looking for? Again, they're finding districts are not following proper bidding procedures, and they're not following the internal control process basically that they've set up and could be their guidelines. The other thing, there's an issue relative to purchasing off of state or off of federal contracts without a bid. This is somewhat of a limited area. I'm going to let Paul talk to that a little bit.
The GSA is the federal contract, and there's only a couple items that we can buy off of that without as an exception to bidding. I believe one of them is the Homeland Security, and but you can use GSA pricing as you can't use it as an exception to bidding, but if there's a company that offers you GSA pricing when you're going out and getting your quotes that's under the bid threshold, you can accept their pricing if they're the lowest person that gave you their price as part of your quotation system. So in that respect, we can use the GSA because we're getting quotes from other companies also, and if they happen to be the lowest one, then you could legally still use it, but you can't use it as an exception to bidding.
Okay. And the last item on that page, it's basically talking about professional contracts. Sometimes people rush into these things and they're trying to get things done, but in fact, you have to make sure that all the paperwork is in place and you have things in writing before the work has begun. Oftentimes, not due to the purchasing department, but basically some other administrators, you find out people have been in and working based upon the fact that somebody's going to issue a purchase order, and the issues that raises with things. The next page, other things that you're looking for. Did you do an RFP for professional services in advance of the services rendered? And again, do you do those RFPs for professional services over maybe a 3 to 5 year period? Are you updated, or do you let that go too long? Basically, they're recommending that you at least do that every 3 years. Again, the other thing is, could be because of new staff or untrained staff, but basically, they'll test the staff to see if they're made aware, if they know what the requirements are when they're basically handling paperwork, and also the purchasing agent will be questioned and tested on that. And again, they want to assure that this is the Office of State Comptroller, that there's no conflict of interest that exists between the staff and the vendors or even internal staff. We know that a lot of us are aware of the whole Rosalind situation. If you were to read that in a novel, you could say that could never happen, but in fact situations like that do, and these procedures are basically trying to head that off before it becomes an issue. Next item, other things we're going to look at again is the use of confirming purchase orders. Again, work was done prior to, rather than having everything in place and approved by the board. Again, bid purchases, you did a bid, you might have issued a purchase order before it was approved by the board. You can't do that. That's subject to citation. If you have duplicate payments or overpayments and you didn't recover them, basically that'll be an issue. Oftentimes, duplicate payments or overpayments are discovered by your claims auditor or doing your internal audit, and when these auditors come along, they see it as an issue outstanding on your books, so you should be able to, they should follow up on this so these issues aren't hanging out there when they get there. And the other thing is this whole validation of state contracts, using state contracts for purchases. I'm going to let Paul talk a little bit about that, how to basically document that to assure yourself you're in compliance.
Now, the way I document my state contract purchases is I'll make a copy of the front page of the contract that gives the group number and the date of the contract period, and then I'll go into that contract and I'll copy the page that's got the vendor's name on it, and then I'll go copy the page that has the vendor's item on it that we're buying off of the state contract. And if it's a discount off the list price, I require them to give us a copy of the list price to document the price that they're giving us. So my documentation is the cover of the state contract, showing the period of time and the group number, then the page with the vendor's name on it and their P number from the contract, and then the page with the item number that the contractor sells. And I take that and I attach that to the requisition copy, which stays in the accounting department, which the purchase order is paid off of. So when the auditors look at it, they have the requisition, they have the documentation of the state contract, they got the receiving slip of the purchase order, they got the invoice, everything right there. But if they find any more questions that's not answered, then they can come into purchasing. But other than that, everything is right there and all documented for them to look at as backup.
Okay, thanks. Well, moving on, additional items that the controller's office will look at. They're looking to see that your data is basically backed up, so you have some. So if you have a fire in your district, you have your records stored somewhere outside of the district. I think districts are pretty much compliant with this, and generally somebody's job to make sure that everything is backed up. And if you ask, you'll probably find out that it's either being backed up and housed somewhere remotely, through an internet connection, or in fact, people might be taking home, actual disk or something, or backup copies to secure its safekeeping. Again, the next item, I guess they found some issues where the business official was appointing an internal claims auditor. We know after these sessions that only the board can do that. And then the other thing is the next one has to do with more of a business office thing, but again, that's that whole cash collection procedure and assuring that cash and checks get to recorded, and there's segregation of duties and making sure that that gets done. If you go to the
there's on the claims auditor, there are certain people that cannot be the claims auditor. It can't be a board member. It cannot be a clerk of the board. It cannot be the treasurer. It cannot be the superintendent. It cannot be the business manager. And it cannot be a clerical or professional directly involved in accounting and purchasing functions of the district.
Okay. And these items here on this next page, I basically we went through and been talking about, but I'm going to slip to the last page because a lot of these have been somewhat. I'm going to go back here. The whole issue of freedom of information and taxpayer interest. We know that generally not so much individuals, but you might have an individual filing a freedom of information request, but oftentimes you'll have the newspapers doing this. So it really behooves you to basically, have your ducks in a row and to avoid any public issues or embarrassment. Again, they have the right to go in and request copies. Generally, you should have someone who's appointed as a public access officer to review these. You can charge individuals for copies being made. And again, I reiterate the fact that once that information goes out there, it can be used in many different ways. Generally, what I would do is if somebody is requesting the information, I try to ascertain why they were requesting it, and if they told me straight, and I would say, well, upon a review of documents, why don't you come back and talk to somebody who knows about it? So in fact, you have the whole picture of how the transaction went. So there can be no misinformation about it. But again, you never know what happens when foiled information goes out of the district. And next, I'm open for any questions you might have. I hope you didn't fall asleep. There's been a lot of information here. It's kind of dry information, but it's my belief that if you take these notes and the notes from the other two sections, you have a very good basis to learn about the whole aspect of purchasing, and it will aid you in training your people. And again, there's nothing like, hands-on and relying upon your colleagues, neighboring districts, and business officials to basically give you a little bit of maybe a mentoring type situation, whatever. But it's a big responsible job. It has a lot of legal requirements, and I hope that we've provided you with a lot of the information that will get you on your way, or at least give you an understanding of the process. Anything else, Paul?
The new law that was passed to bring the purchase thresholds up to 10 to 20 and 20 to 35 is no longer scheduled to expire on June 1st, 2013. So it's going to stay in effect, and it doesn't look like it's going to expire like they said it was.
And what were you saying, Paul, about the board policy? If they didn't change it in the board policy, their thresholds?
Yeah, your threshold should be brought current in your policy. Otherwise, you have to stay with what's in your policy because you'll be in violation of your policy.
So that's important to know for any folks who are in charge of that end of things. So that's all I have for now. If you have questions, I'd be glad to entertain. Well, there is one thing. I don't know if the individual is here who asked the question last time, but computerized online bidding is being done by Nassau BOCES, what I've been told. I asked Paul if he knew of anybody using it upstate or any information from Sampo, and it's really not something that's very prevalent, but the law is in place for you to do that, and you definitely have to work out, policies and procedures of how to handle that. So I'm sure once you could call Nassau and ask them for some insight and guidance on that, but I'm sure it's a process that's pretty cut and dry, but has to be followed to a T. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Bob. If anyone has any questions, please hit 7# on your phone, and I'll put you right through. Again, that's 7# on your phone to ask Bob or Paul a question. All right, guys, I've got no questions on my end here, so thank you very much for presenting today.
Okay.
Okay, you're welcome.
What do you think?
Thank you all for coming.
Good. All right, Matt, we're set?
The moderator has ended the conference. Goodbye. Thank you for calling.